What if everything you believe about reality is nothing more than an illusion? What if the way you see the world is just a reflection of the limitations your mind has imposed on itself? A true leap in consciousness doesn't happen when you learn something new, but when you realize that the very structure of your perception can be transformed. Jacobo Grinberg dedicated his life to investigating this phenomenon and reached a disturbing conclusion. Reality is not something fixed, external, or unchangeable. It is a dynamic field shaped by your consciousness. We live believing that to evolve, we need to accumulate knowledge, consume more information, memorize concepts, and study incessantly. But what if this pursuit is just another distraction? Grinberg revealed that the leap in consciousness doesn't occur through intellect, but through a profound change in the way we perceive the world. Information alone doesn't transform anyone. What determines your level of consciousness isn't how much you know, but how much you can see beyond the filters your mind imposes. What separates those who awaken from those who remain stuck in their limitations isn't intelligence or luck, but the courage to question their own perception. The mind creates invisible barriers, beliefs that trap and keep an individual within a specific reality. The greatest obstacle to expanding consciousness isn't outside, but within. And if you don't see these barriers, it's because they are already part of you. Now that you are faced with this knowledge, there are only two options. Continue immersed in the same old perception, or open your eyes to a reality that few dare to see. The question is, are you ready to take that leap? The biggest obstacle to expanding consciousness isn't the lack of knowledge, but the attachment to a limited perception of reality. The world isn't something external that you just passively observe. It is shaped by your beliefs, mental filters, and interpretations. However, most people don't realize this. They live believing that reality is fixed, that the rules of the game have already been set, and that there is no other option but to follow the predictable path imposed on them. Grinberg demonstrated that the human mind builds its own prison by identifying with unconscious patterns. The problem is that these patterns are not seen as illusions, but as absolute truths. If someone believes that life is hard, this belief manifests in experiences that reinforce that difficulty. If the mind is programmed to see scarcity, everything around will seem insufficient. And the worst part, these beliefs are so deeply rooted that the person doesn't even realize they are trapped in them. The illusion of evolution through accumulating knowledge is another hindrance. The world is saturated with information, and many believe that the more books they read, the more videos they watch, and the more theories they know, the more enlightened they will become. But if it were that simple, everyone seeking knowledge would have already awakened. What prevents this transformation isn't the lack of information, but the inability to see beyond one's own filters. Information can be useful, but without a change in perception, everything remains the same. Another critical point Grinberg explored is attachment to identity. Many don't evolve because they fear losing who they believe they are. Consciousness clings to the security of the known, even if that known is a state of suffering. Change is frightening because it requires the dissolution of old patterns. To the mind, changing means abandoning the illusion of control. And that's exactly why so many people remain trapped in destructive cycles, repeating the same mistakes, living the same pains, and maintaining the same beliefs that limit their experience of the world. The hypnosis studied by Grinberg proves that the mind is programmable. If a belief can be altered in minutes, then everything you consider reality can be redefined. But most people don't have that clarity. They live believing that their problems are unchangeable, that their difficulties are definitive, that their limitations are unquestionable truths. This is the biggest problem, the lack of awareness of one's own power to shape experience. As long as someone believes that transformation comes from outside, from a guru, a miraculous method, an ideal moment, they will remain stuck in stagnation. Grinberg made it clear that the only way out is internal. No one is going to save you. There is no cosmic event that will change your life without you first changing your perception. The leap in consciousness is not a distant destination. It is available now, at the moment you choose to see beyond illusions. Jacobo Grinberg was not just a scientist. He was an explorer of the human mind, someone who dared to question the barriers of perception and delve into the hidden workings of reality. His work challenged traditional scientific concepts, going beyond the limits imposed by conventional thinking. He didn't just study consciousness, he investigated it as a living, changing phenomenon directly shaped by perception itself. Unlike academics who limit themselves to abstract theories, Grinberg ventured where few dared to go. He didn't settle for hypotheses. He sought direct answers by closely studying those who had truly experienced the transformation of perception. In his research with Mexican shamans, he noticed something revolutionary. These figures didn't access expanded states of consciousness through accumulating knowledge, but through unconditioning the mind. The shamans Grinberg studied didn't need scientific explanations to alter reality. They simply did it. They demonstrated that perception, when trained and refined, can literally modify what we call the external world. This reinforced the central idea Grinberg carried throughout his journey. Consciousness is not a reflection of reality, but its source. This explained, for example, how shamans could influence matter, access information without physical means, or instantly change emotional states. They weren't bound by the common mind's filters because they had broken free from identifying with the patterns that limit perception. And that was Grinberg's big insight. What prevents people from seeing the truth isn't the lack of knowledge, but the mental programming that filters what they are capable of perceiving. If the reality you experience is a reflection of what you believe is possible, then any profound transformation begins at the level of perception. Grinberg scientifically demonstrated that what you call reality is malleable, fluid, and directly linked to the state of your mind. The big question isn't what exists outside, but what you allow yourself to see, and this is where the game changes. If perception is the key, then what separates those who awaken from those who remain stuck? The next step is understanding the mechanisms of this transformation. The illusion that the more you learn, the more you expand, keeps most people trapped in the same cycle. Reading about enlightenment doesn't enlighten anyone. Studying consciousness doesn't awaken consciousness. True transformation doesn't come from information, but from the ability to perceive beyond your own filters. Grinberg identified that the great blockage of the human being isn't the lack of access to knowledge, but perceptual rigidity. Over a lifetime, the mind creates a belief system that serves as a set of distorted lenses. Everything you see, feel, and experience passes through these filters. And if these lenses are programmed to see limitation, you will never see the truth beyond them. Real change doesn't happen by understanding intellectual concepts, but by collapsing the mental filters that prevent expanded perception. This is the difference between someone who reads about the ocean and someone who dives into it. You can have access to all the world's information, but as long as you don't change your perception, your reality will remain the same. The traditional view of reality makes us believe that we exist in a solid external world, independent of our mind. But what Grinberg discovered is that reality is not an external phenomenon. It is an interactive field between consciousness and the structure of existence. He called it the neuronal field, a matrix where what we perceive as real is actually a reflection of our own mental configuration. If what you see on the outside is just a reflection of what's inside, then any real change can only happen internally. This means that problems, repetitive patterns, and seemingly insurmountable blocks are not isolated external events, but projections of your own mind. Changing the world around you starts by changing the way you perceive it. The question is, what within you is creating the reality you live? Attachment as a prison. Why don't you awaken? What prevents most people from making the leap in consciousness isn't ignorance but attachment. Attachment to what they already know, attachment to their own beliefs, attachment to their own suffering. There is a comfort zone, even within chaos. The ego prefers the stability of a limited world over the risk of dissolving the self. Grinberg observed this in the shamans he studied. They didn't carry the same need for a fixed identity that ordinary people do. They could enter and exit altered states of perception because they weren't stuck to a specific story about who they were. And that's the key. The more you cling to a fixed version of yourself, the more your perception becomes limited. Often, what keeps someone stagnant isn't the lack of paths, but the fear of losing the reference of what they consider real. That's why many prefer to believe that change will come from outside, from an external event or a miraculous solution, instead of accepting that the only thing that needs to change is the way their own mind operates. The collapse of beliefs, the key to expanding consciousness. If reality is constructed by the mind, then the only way to alter it is by breaking the mental structures that support it. Grinberg studied how hypnosis can change perceptions in minutes. This means that the mind doesn't distinguish between objective reality and internal programming. It simply executes the commands it receives. If a belief can be implanted or removed instantly, then your entire worldview can be reprogrammed. You're not stuck with real limitations, only with crystallized perceptions. And if any perception can be altered, then any reality can be rebuilt. The only thing that separates a limited state of consciousness from an expanded one is the willingness to abandon the beliefs that sustain the limitation. Resistance to change isn't a coincidence. It's a defense mechanism of the ego. The ego fears dissolution because its identity was built on these beliefs. But as long as there is resistance, there is no real transformation. The final question is, are you ready to let go of what you believe to be true? Because that is the only path to see beyond the illusion. Imagine you're in a maze. Since you were born, you've been walking through it, convinced that there is a right path, a definitive exit. But each corridor only leads to new directions that seem different but are, deep down, just repetitions of the same route. You seek knowledge, try to understand the rules of the game, thinking that by discovering more about the maze, you'll be closer to getting out. But what if the problem isn't finding the right path? What if the real mistake is believing that the maze is real? Grinberg understood that humanity's great illusion is living trapped in a restricted perception of reality without questioning whether that perception can be expanded. Just as a fish doesn't perceive the water it swims in, most people don't notice the filters that define their experiences. Life seems hard, challenges seem insurmountable, but what if all of this is just the reflection of beliefs accepted as absolute truths? There are those who spend their entire lives seeking answers, reading books, following methods, waiting for a moment of enlightenment that never comes. But there are also those who, in an instant, collapse everything they believe to be real and awaken to a new perception. Not because they accumulated more information, but because they had the courage to let go of what was keeping them stuck. The question is, are you ready to leave the old world behind? Because this leap isn't comfortable, safe, or predictable. It requires complete surrender. But those who cross this boundary never see reality the same way again. There comes a moment when there's nowhere left to run. You can continue consuming knowledge, accumulating information, trying to find external answers that justify your reality. Or you can finally accept that the only thing that really needs to change is the way you perceive the world. Transformation doesn't happen when you learn something new, but when you let go of what keeps you stuck. You already know that reality is a reflection of your mind. You already understand that the only barrier between you and a leap in consciousness is your own attachment to limitations. The question now is no longer, what is missing to know, but what am I willing to abandon? So, what will you do from here? Return to the comfort zone, where everything is predictable and safe, or take the first step to expand your perception. The invitation isn't to learn more, but to see differently. Change doesn't happen tomorrow. It doesn't happen when conditions are ideal. It happens now, at the moment you decide to stop feeding the illusion of limitation and begin to experience reality as it truly is. Moldable, fluid, a direct reflection of your consciousness. If you feel that this message resonates with something inside you, share this knowledge. Question yourself, look inward. True expansion doesn't come from theory, but from experience. And the only thing that separates you from that experience is your willingness to see beyond what you've always believed to be real.